Welcome everyone to this very special ETRise webinar. Finance for micro, small and medium-sized enterprises have always been a concern for all stakeholders, from entrepreneurs, financial institutes, government organizations. Everyone has been concerned about funding for MSMEs. However, COVID-19 and the resultant lockdown has aggravated this problem even more. While raising funds has become one of the topmost concerns, it is not very clear what avenues are available at the moment to finance your business. Problems are only compounded because businesses now have to manage existing debt and also take care of the cash flow issues. To find answers to these problems, we have with us today Ashwini Anand, founder and CEO of Monsoon CreditTech, K.M. Nonia, MD, India Country Leader, Equifax, and Saurabh Agarwal, member, Managing Committee, Assocham and Principal, IIF CCMS. So great having you here, all of you. Thank you so much for being a part of this. And so, Ashwini, let me come to you first. You are an entrepreneur who's also faced the 2008-9 economic crisis, and you are facing this crisis now, which of course everyone says is far bigger than anything that we've ever seen. So with what has happened in 2008-9 and what's happening now, what are some of the top money things that come to your mind, money lessons that come to your mind when it comes to problems like these?
Sure. So I think the two crises are fundamentally very different. When it came to the 2009 crisis, I mean, it was not this sudden. So you had some amount of time to prepare for it. I mean, the writing was on the wall in 2008 when there was so much of exuberance. And it started to go down. You started to see, large mortgage lenders writing down their loan books, writing down their assets. You knew it was coming, so you could prepare. But this, on the other hand, was completely sudden. I mean, I think even as late as, let's say, the middle of this February, I don't think a lot of people predicted that it would get this bad, right? So I think that's one fundamental difference. And in 2009, those of us who've sort of lived through that have learned a lot of lessons on basically how to just clamp down when the going gets tough, and how to manage cash flows, how to, necessity is the mother of invention. So, you really learn how to cut costs, operate in shoestring budgets, negotiate with pretty much everyone you can, right? Negotiate with those who are supposed to pay you to say, okay, I'll take the cut. Just give it to me. Just pay me quickly, right? Negotiating with your own, people who are working with you, saying, look, this is you all know how the market is. We need to tighten budgets, and that will have implications for you. Whether it means your ability to continue to have you work with us, or how much we're going to pay you. There's all sorts of prioritization that goes on, right? So a company that kind of lives through those times was just going to get a lot leaner, a lot more efficient, and will have much higher chances of surviving a downturn like this. But the broad lessons are the same. Cut costs, try and collect faster, don't take on excessive risk, and just lay low to survive another day.
Nani, if I can come to you, given you're closely associated with the industry, what's your broad sense of the funding environment at the moment in the country?
Thank you, Pran. So just if you look at the broad funding environment, just to build on what Ashwin also talked about, the scenario is completely different, right? From what incidents have happened in the past and what's happened now. There is a complete lockdown for such a long period of time. And technically, what worked before, not necessary that it will work going forward. At the same tone, what did not work before might work going forward. So I think scenarios are completely changing. Just from a funding standpoint, I think Government of India and the Central Bank, Reserve Bank of India, have taken steps to improve liquidity in the system, right? You know, the reduced CRR rates and reduced balances, I think has certainly improved the liquidity in the system. I think one of the key questions, Pran, is about how to access capital, right? You know, how do I access capital? If I'm a small and medium business, how do I access capital given the current scenario? Is the broadly a question that I think needs to be addressed very carefully. So if you think through that, a couple of things that I think one has to look at is look at the business model itself, right? The business model in which we managed so far, going forward, will that be effective or would it require a change? Would it require corrections? So I think some of that has to be very carefully looked at it. The second thing is about the need for a bit more digitization. Given the social distancing, given the sensitivities that are coming up from what has happened and what we're facing as of now, I think there's a need for improved digitization, or embrace some of the technologies, even technologies like WhatsApp, which has got one of the good penetrations in the country in terms of the usage basis. How do you use some of those technology platforms to effectively do your business is something that one could also look at very carefully, right? And third is obviously looking at your cost structures. How is your cost structure look like, and what can be deferred? How much can you come down? Is the third thing. And you sum all this up, it was exactly what you need to present to a lender, right? At the end of the day, the lender is looking at what is the potential risk of lending, right? So if we can convince the lender that the potential risk of lending is lower because of the following reasons, because of the following steps that we've taken, potentially, I think access to capital can get little easier.
Right. Saurabh, what are your views? What do you think is the current investment climate like? Saurabh?
Yes.
Yeah. What do you think is the current investment or funding climate like at the moment?
Okay. So currently, if we look at the current funding environment, that will provide credit guarantee. Currently, what our MSMEs are facing a trouble that they already have overstretched because we were already suffering from economic slowdown. So collaterals are already there. So the first thing is about 1 lakh crore, and the credit guarantee will be given by the government. Government will provide insurance, and the part of the interest will also be paid by the government. 2 new secretaries have already been appointed just for the MSME sector. Apart from this, India has already taken a loan of $1.5 billion from Asian Development Bank, and that will also be used for providing credit guarantee. But this will take time to come. Till that, what is the option available to the people who are attending this seminar? I think top-up loans is something which they can go in for. PNB and even India Infoline offers top-up loans, but there are conditions. Conditions is you must have a very good credit history. Secondly, you must have not taken part in the moratorium, which has been said, that is, you are paying your EMIs regularly. If you satisfy this, then you can go in for these top-up loans. Also, thirdly, WhatsApp is coming up with its own lending arm. So practically, MSMEs can go in for WhatsApp, but it is waiting approval from the NPCI. So, and once NPCI approves, we can also go in to WhatsApp and ask for money that you can really pay. Apart from this, microfinance institutions who are lending to almost 25 lakh micro enterprises, serving almost hiring almost about 12,500 people, they have been asking the government, Ministry of Finance, that we should be allowed to restructure our debt. And I think if this happens, if the debt, part of the debt is converted into equity, which microfinance institution have sent a proposal. I think an NYU professor, Marty, his article was there in one of the Economic Times, and he said there is a time when we have to look at pseudo equity. The concept of pseudo equity is we saying, see, all the schemes which are coming of the government and MSME, they are towards debt. You can go in for non-convertible debentures, you can go in for foreign collaborators. RBI has given a figure of almost $8.75 million in February itself, which has come, and Mazar, which is an MSME, it has taken about $375,000 from abroad. Now, that is all there, but I recommend to all those people who are sitting here, rather choose a better way of equity. Now, in equity, if you see today's newspaper, rights issue. So rather than going either here and there, the companies should target their existing shareholders and ask them to subscribe to right shares. I think that could be one way. Another very novel criteria is currently a lot of money is going into mutual funds, and an innovative structure is required whereby MSMEs can put their assets in that trust, and the trust units can be offered in the form of units which can be subscribed by individual buyers. I think these are some things. Reliance has already done it. Reliance is even going for rights issue. Apart from this, a lot of MSMEs are going even for non-convertible debentures. Many companies like Mahindra and Mahindra, TVS Motors, almost about 5,300 crores worth of this non-convertible debentures have been issued. I think these are some of the ways, plus reduction in the repo rate from 4% to 3.75. It's a very good step. But if you see currently also all banks, especially private banks, want to keep their money with the Reserve Bank of India. Now, which prevents lending to MSME sector. I think RBI should take a bold step and reduce the reverse repo rate to 2% or at the most 1%. So there's no incentive to banks to keep their money. Another could be printing of money and providing. I think that's a debatable issue. Print money and then provide more money to the MSME sectors. MSME sector at least needs about 1 or 2 lakh crores liquidity injection if it needs to be saved in this current onslaught.
Right. Thank you, Saurabh. Ashwini, if I can come to you, banks naturally, form the the base for lending, and most MSMEs look to bank to meet their various financing needs. What is your assessment on where banks stand at the moment when it comes to lending? Private, public, cooperative, what is it that you are getting?
That's right, Pran. So banks do give out the bulk of credit to MSMEs. So as of now, I think we have about 11 lakh crores in credit outstanding to MSMEs, right? And 21% of this approximately is given by NBFCs and the rest by banks. But we've seen that, credit growth, when it comes to MSME lending has come down to 6.7% in the last quarter. And then that, remember that last quarter, that was even before, this entire month of lockdown. So, here's a fundamental problem. So it's not as much about liquidity anymore, right? So liquidity is one concern, right? But there are a whole lot of steps to take care of liquidity. I mean, your the repo has been cut. CRR is, so a lot of loans, whether it's retail loans, whether it's MSME loans, and MSME loans are a significant part of this. They're exempt from CRR calculation. CRR itself has been cut from 4 to 3%. LCR, that is liquidity coverage ratio, has been cut from 100 to 80%, right? And then you allowed these moratoriums that can be given for loans. But and then you have 2 TLROs, right, which allow you to allow banks to buy corporate bonds, and then the one is 1 lakh crores, another is 50,000 crores, out of which a substantial portion has to go to lower rated bonds. But that's all on the liquidity front. Now the problem is not liquidity. banks have a ton of money sitting with them. The question is, uh, here's the chain, right? The government, if it pays on time to states, the central government pays on time to states, and states pay on time to corporates, and the central government as well, pays to corporates. Then corporates can pay on time to MSMEs. Right now, what's happened is that because of all of this, so even before this, so ever since ILFS and Yes Bank, we've seen that there is risk aversion. This risk aversion leads to a slowdown, which again increases risk aversion. And now we're at a stage where, in addition to all this risk aversion, you have a complete lockdown. So if a small business is not making money, even if you have all the liquidity in the world, why would a bank lend to a small business which is not making money? If it's not making money, how will it pay back? So even if it has money on its hands, even if you have some extreme form, just for the sake of argument, say you have negative interest rates by RBI, theoretically, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but even if you have to sort of pay to put your money in a sovereign bond, why would the bank sort of give money to an SME that is not making any revenue and risk losing 100% of it, rather than just conserve cash, right? So that is the key question. So the larger question is, if when the lockdown ends, then you have to see corporates starting to revive and then start paying their MSMEs and start doing business again. And that is when there will be risk that is coming back. Now, I'm not saying it's all gloom and doom. Look, there are a couple of really good schemes which offer. See, ultimately, what is the thing that banks are interested in? It's credit risk, right? So when you talk of credit risk, so there are two interesting schemes. One is the Mudra scheme, which is refinance. Again, that's liquidity. But more interestingly, there is a pseudo, as a quasi-governmental trust, which is managed by SIDBI, which covers 50% of the credit risk of Mudra loans, right? And last year about 3 lakh crores of Mudra loans were given out, all to MSMEs. Up to 50,000 is one category, then you have up to 5 lakhs and then up to 10 lakhs. This is all collateral free, right? But the catch is that the first 5% at a portfolio level is borne by the bank. And then the guarantee kicks in at a pro rata 50%. So the bank still takes the first hit, right? There's also the Credit Guarantee Fund Trust for MSMEs, and that has an 8K crore corpus. And again, that's 50% of the risk that is guaranteed. But this was not enough even before the lockdown. So now it's basically about risk aversion. Unless the lockdown ends and business restarts, liquidity will not solve the problem. So there is a definite risk aversion, and that is not going to go away till the lockdown ends.
Right. Mr. Nanya, what you're picking up on the ground, does this risk aversion stay? And from what we are hearing, will chasing bank loan actually make little sense now, or what?
So, very naturally, I think all the lenders are assessing the potential risk of the change scenarios, right? And if you look at the lending that happens to the MSMEs and corporates, the large part of the lending is on working capital lending. So I think everybody would be very, very carefully watching as to how the current businesses will turn out and how they will continue, how they change, is the key question, right? So I think all the lenders will continue to assess as to what is the potential risk. As I said, past is a good indicator of the potential future risk, but I think given the current scenario, which is very, very different from what happened, I think everybody will watch as to what the risks are. But having said that, right, I think this is a good time for all the MSMEs and SMEs to sit back and think through exactly as to how their business should look like, what the going forward strategy should be, how should they reduce costs, where should they defer the costs, and all of the elements that I talked about in the beginning, I think are very, very important to give that confidence to the lenders as to how the potential risk can be mitigated. So I think that is a very, very important element of it. Though this 3 months there is a moratorium available on repayment, so the credit histories are not will not get impacted as by the directions of the RBI. So, but once we come out of the moratorium period, ensuring that whatever EMIs that are due, if it is due, paid on time, I think it's extremely important to maintain that credit history going forward as well. It's a difficult time, but I think change is critical. I think change is very important. I think if they can bring in change, adapt to the new scenario, I think again, access to capital. How do you access the capital that is available? We all talked about liquidity being there in the system, banks conserving cash. How do you access that capital? I think that is the big question. How can we help MSME to access capital is a key element.
Right. Saurabh, if banks is one element of the financing funnel, NBFCs have of late played a key role also in financing SMEs. What is their position at the moment? Should MSMEs look at NBFCs to fulfill some of these funding requirements, or are the NBFCs themselves on a shaky ground?
Pran, certainly it's a very important issue you have raised. NBFCs have played a very vital role in supporting the MSMEs, and that is why the government requested RBI to create a special window for these NBFCs. However, NBFCs have extended too long. We are having an unsold inventory about 10 lakh flats, and they've heavily extended their support to the real estate sector. Now, since they have gone in there overextended, their position currently, they are very fragile right now, depending upon the funding they get from the reserve and the special funds they get from the Reserve Bank. But as I said, liquidity is very important. We must see that currently our MSMEs, what strategies they should follow. First, even if they get debt, should they take the debt? In my opinion, just taking debt would not be, because if the business model is not viable. Rather, what good companies are doing, they are going to the existing equity holders and saying, give us more money. If you don't have that, create a new model. New model could be, you could go in for thermal meters or this healthcare equipment which are being asked by the government. Create a business model where a foreign collaborator would be willing to put in money. So we get the pre-series funding A. Third, if you have receivables, then you should go in for factoring or trades mechanism, whereby you can convert your receivables into cash. If you have inventory and you think that after particular this lockdown is over or it is eased, you can sell it at a discount. I think these are methods by which all entrepreneurs should go in for proper working capital management, whereby the operating cycle should be very small, the inventory should be met almost on just in time, the your cash budget, the cash inflows and outflows should match. Our MSMEs, they take on cash and give it on credit. I think this is time whereby MSME should put a full stop on such practices. If you are paying your liabilities, your vendors in cash, then I think to whomever you are supplying, you must also insist for cash. Another thing is, MSME as a whole should request the government to pay all the payables. That means whatever is spending by the government. In fact, through your ETRise itself, I'm thankful this point was taken up. I think all the GST refunds, if they have not come, they should come. Also, EPFO has made a point that you can file your return, you can pay later. So I think if government is providing these facilities, it should be taken. In fact, I'm on ESI board, and I have recommended the government that unemployment insurance should be. This is a medical emergency. See how we are preventing ourselves by staying home. We are preventing ourselves from the virus. It's a medical emergency. So ESI Corporation, which is almost having 80,000 crores corpus, that should come forward and provide for the salaries of these people, because salaries have to be paid, and as per the recent law, it has to be paid. It is not charity. So considering all this, I think equity and other sources of financing should be preferred over this credit guarantee loans, which would be available in bulk in short time, or these top-up loans. Also, there are many P2P lending firms which have come up, but they offer loans at 12%. So I think, in just, if you take it at 12%, just in 10 years, you will be doubling your loan. And this may lead to large-scale bankruptcies. So I think not only availability of loan, but also seeing, would I be able to generate enough cash flows in the future time period? These are very important, and essentially equity influx is required in the form of microfinance converting, one-time debt restructuring. I think even if NBFCs have to come forward, I think they should go in for some sort of structuring, so that we have done so many case studies where the lender has worked with the company, with their people on the board, and the companies have come up flying colors. Why? These are those times, and I think we need some strategy for that.
Right. For our viewers here, there will be a small poll question which comes up on your screen, and I would request all of you to choose whatever you think is applicable. Mr. Nadia, if I can come to you, what does the current situation do to your credit and your risk analysis model? Earlier, you were doing credit and risk analysis based on certain model. Does that change now? What does it mean for people, for businesses also?
Right, a good question, Pran. So if you look at the credit risk, this is the moratorium period, right? The 3 months is a moratorium period where Reserve Bank has given an option for the borrower to either choose moratorium or not choose moratorium. So given that option, even if somebody chooses the moratorium for 3 months period, there is a clear guidelines to ensure that the credit history should not get impacted of the beneficiaries of moratorium. So we are following that to ensure that the credit history of those who have availed moratorium during this period is not impacted. Having said that, once we exit from the moratorium period, then the credit history will get monitored the way it was getting monitored before, and the risk scores also will get calculated based on how the repayment history has been, how much of default has been happening. So all that will get considered into assessing the credit risk. So up till end May, there is no change in the credit history because of the guidelines. Post that, it is back to the same form, the same approach that we all adopted to assess the credit risk.
Right. Ashwini, what are your views on how credit models are going to change after this?
So I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of change, for primarily 2 reasons. So if you look at, if you look at how credit risk is looked at right now, then there are one of 3 ways. There's the standard way in which you have a regular model where you have individual weights. It's very subjective. There's a human underwriter taking different factors into account. Over there's a lot of subjective judgment. So it's very hard to say how that part will play out. Now, a whole range of firms use models. Right? Now, some of these models can be older models, logistic regressions and linear regressions, and there's the next generation of machine learning powered models. Right? In fact, our core offering to lenders is machine learning powered loan underwriting, right? And that is how the biggest and best banks and lenders across the board do it. There is a machine learning model, and then you have your regular horizontal or vertical cuts, which are rule based, and then these 2 work in tandem. So now, if you look at look at the situation today, right? I think as Mr. Nanya said, credit history will not be impacted because you cannot see, you report something called the DPD string, right, which is the days past due. That will not change. But every lender who has a loan on his or her book will be able to see the true DPD data, true bounce data, right? So, there's nothing stopping a lender from using this data to update their own internal models, right? So that is one change. Second, look, a machine learning model is like a piece of fine precision equipment. When there's something called a regime change, something where the data itself changes, you need to protect it with another model on the side, which changes data from uh, behaving very differently. It is a completely different population. So now that is where a bunch of different things come in. For example, is a business in an affected industry, right? Does a person work in an affected industry? Is a person self-employed or salaried? Has that said company issued salary cuts? Right? Is the person or the business in a red zone or a green zone? Is the business in a hotspot or not? Right? So all of these are factors, and I think you know on, on paper, whether things change or not, in reality they're going to change drastically. Drastically.
Right. Saurabh, if I can come to you, another issue that MSMEs face at the moment is related to cash flow. Everything has come to a standstill. Uh, is there some ways businesses can mitigate that?
Yes, so I just had many questions, which you shared with me were also related to cash flow. And essentially, cash flow synchronization is what I plan, post this lockdown that MSME should target. When I say cash flow synchronization, very simple management accounting technique known as cash budgeting can be followed by MSMEs. They can month-wise create what are their inflows and what are their outflows. And essentially, this is the time whereby focus should not be done on capex, increasing your capital expenditure, also increasing the business. These are survival times, which I feel. So practically, as much as your cash inflows allow you, and cash inflows, how can they be increased? So as I just discussed, in cash flows, one, you must try to convert all your receivables into cash. So all the debtors, you should, that would take time, but that is to be attempted. Second, whatever inventory you have, that should be converted into cash. That is the second method what we normally say. Third, you just gave a questionnaire. In that, one of the option is family and friends. I think this is the time whereby rather than increasing your loan book, because debt is a double-edged sword. If your sales increase, your profit will also increase if you have debt. But if your sales decrease, which is likely to happen, please understand, everybody is going to become risk averse. Everybody is going to conserve cash which they have. In such scenario, pushing sales would be very difficult. Another thing what firms can do is, which have been only going through, this normal media marketing, they can push themselves to digital marketing. So a lot of firms can think and plan and going for digital marketing today. Another thing, those which are export oriented units, they would have to design models which are inbound. That means because we will not see the borders opening up so soon. So whatever export units are there, a part of his MSMEs, they'll have to create products, and for export they create high quality. I think here quality would have to be reduced and the need would have to be kept at first flow. In terms of cost, I think wages have substantially increased in some part, in some improving the quality of life. I think there would be some sort of, as it happened in 2008, Similar sort of thing can be seen. Wages would be would see a downfall. Similarly, expenses in terms of utility expenses. If you don't need an electricity connection and you're using your plant capacity at a lower level, lower your electricity connection load because there's a minimum charge. So I think utility bills, the amount of water, Indian government charges not on the basis of even if you don't consume, some minimum charges are charged. I think businesses will have to reduce, if you're not using the capacity, rather reduce it. I think whatever, all the costs need to be divided into two parts. What is your fixed cost? Then what is your variable cost? In variable cost also, what would you consider as totally variable and what you would consider as semi-variable? Fixed and semi-variable cannot be controlled, but I think the variable cost has to be brought down so that the inflows and the outflows match. And cash budgeting, there are many online softwares also available which enable firms to cash budgeting. I think that is the solution. There are many models also. There is Miller-Orr models. There is inventory models like EOQ inventory, optimal quantity, which help you optimize in ordering cost and carrying cost. So there are many models also available. I think firms can go in and go in ahead and try to use such models. Cost is to be reduced, cash outflow has to be reduced, cash inflow has to be reduced. These are the simple techniques. And if your product is not making revenue, you will have to go and change your entire product line. I know of one of my MSME exporters who was exporting to all these countries. He just closed his factory for 7 days and now he is making PPE kits. So he has just closed for 7 days. He has not closed at all. I asked him. So he says, no, I have to change my business model. So I think that is what is required in current times.
Right. Mr. Nania, any views on this?
Certainly, I think both of Ashwin and Saurabh have covered clearly in terms of how the cash flow situation has to be managed. I think one thing I'll add to that is deferment of expenses, right? The way to conserve your cash flow is defer your expenses. Work with your suppliers to see as to can you defer part of the expenses. I think one thing we must all remember is that if I'm a buyer, I'm also a supplier to someone. So there's a chain that works. I think we must all ensure that the chain works. So deferment, partial deferment is something that one should look at very, very clearly to tide over this difficult period, right? So it's important to, sell your goods and, create inventory into cash. At the same time, I think defer your expenses so that your cash outflow is managed extremely, extremely well. And plus look at some of the government schemes that are coming up, right? So there are subsidized working capital loans that are coming up where government is guaranteeing the interest rates, the differential interest rates. I think it comes at a low interest cost. So I think look at some of those options to see as to how, if there is a cash flow gap, how can we manage that cash flow gap? I think that is extremely important. Managing a tight ship becomes even more critical, even more important given the current scenario. And some of the extra expenses that we potentially would have incurred in the business, I think, should be avoided. The general saying is that what's avoidable, avoid those expenses. So I think that is extremely important. Reducing capex, if there is a capex which is already planned well before the COVID situation started, how can you hold off that capex so that you conserve your cash? Is also some of the various methods of how you can conserve cash and improve your cash flow given the difficult situation that everybody is passing through.
Right, Ashwini, any views on this that you would want to add?
So I think during this period, MSME promoters and partners should think of themselves as machines. A machine doesn't have considerations other than matching inflows and outflows, right? There should be no other consideration. So what are all the various expenses? How can you cut every single one of them, and how much can you cut them by, right? So while we always talk about buffer capital, about liquidity. I think one big source of optimization here is renegotiating. So if you are a partner or a promoter in an SME, question you should ask is, have you renegotiated every single cost? So if the answer is no, then you should go and renegotiate. And that includes everything. Have you renegotiated your rent? Have you renegotiated any committed expenses that you have? If there's a contract with a renegotiation clause, can you go renegotiate? And not everything is about the paperwork. Very often, people or entities prefer a, a payment today, even if it is slightly lower, than some theoretical payment that they're going to get at some point of time, right? So that is what the focus should be on. Can you give? Can you earn a big discount on the payment in return for making good on the payment? Because I think that in the MSME world is like everything, right? The level of contracts say a lot of things. People say a lot of things. They don't always deliver. So, people are willing to put a big premium on actual delivery, on actual payment, on actual cash flow. So, many of you will be surprised by how much discount you can get if you renegotiate and you build a track record of credibility where you say, I will give you X dollars, X rupees today, give me a discount, versus I will give you some, 250% of X sometime into the future, and I'm going to keep making you chase B forever. And that's one thing. Second is every cost, whether it is employee cost, whether it is vendor cost. Look, these are times when large corporations are putting in large pay cuts, right? Irrespective of what rules are sort of talked about, if you look out there, when the most valuable companies in India by market capitalization are putting in pay cuts, when their chairmen are going without pay, right? That these are unprecedented times. So there's nothing wrong in renegotiating. There is nothing wrong in cutting every cost that you can cut. And similarly with those who are supposed to pay you as well, right? Give them a discount for a short payment today. Take payment in advance and say, I'll give you lower cost. So the important point I'm trying to make is, a certain payment is more valuable than an uncertain payment, even if the quantum of payment is, say, 250% or 300%. That's how it works in reality. So use that now. And I think if you're a small business owner, you should think less about liquidity, less about reserves, less about raising capital, as to think about increasing the revenue and reducing expenses. That I think is more important.
Right. Very quickly before we take the questions from our viewers, Mr. Nane, if you had to run an SME today, what would be your top 3 sources of raising funds? Whom would you try first?
The first one would be look at your outstanding collections, right? What's pending for to be collected. Wherever you already made supplies, collections which are due, I think that's the absolute low-hanging fruit, where monies have to come in. So I think that would be the first approach, to make sure that we go and collect all the money that's due to us. So that's the first source of cash that needs to come in. The second is, I'm sure, as we came into the lockdown, if I were to be running, we would have had inventory, we would have built up some amount of level of inventory. Is there a way to liquidate that inventory, not necessarily at the same cost at which we liquidated earlier? Is there a better way to liquidate that inventory quicker and faster? The longer you hold inventory, longer is the holding cost of the capital that you've invested on building the product, right? So is there a way to liquidate that inventory very, very quickly is extremely, extremely important. And the third thing that I would look at is, some of the government schemes coming, especially to support MSMEs and SMEs. How can we reach out? I think what's important during these times is communication, right? communication with your employees, communication with your suppliers, communication with your lenders, sitting across the lenders table to have a conversation to say, this is where we are, and this was the business model that I was in. These are the changes that I've done. These are the corrections that I've done. Expenses. This is how I'm focused on my collections, and this is how I focused on my liquidation of inventory. And then have that conversation with the lender to see as to what help can we get. What are some of the government schemes that are there? Things like inter-subsidy eligibility. Can you avail that? It's low-cost capital, right? So to tide over the situation, can you access a low-cost capital? That is very, very important. Capital coming at a high cost again adds more burden to you. How can we access the low-cost capital? I think that's extremely important to have a conversation. Though these are broadly, would be the approaches that I would look at to see as to how you bridge over this or tide over the situation from a cash flow standpoint, and also ensure the continuity of business, which is extremely important to make sure that there is a continuity of business is very, very important. I think those are three or four broad things that I would approach.
Right. If I can come to the questions now, Anil Chauhan asks, how do you see the situation in the next 6 months? Saurabh, if you want to take that.
Situation in the next 6 months are going to be extremely challenging. Orders, whatever you have, try to hold on to them, and further orders may come at a very huge discount, as Ashwini really pointed out. Pran, I would just like to add, Ashwini was talking about discounts and getting the money. A lot of students have done their project on discounting. And what really happens is you say 2 by 10 net 30. If you pay me within 10 days, I'll give you 2% discount. But in any case, you need to pay me in 30 days. Normally, how does Indian businessmen respond to it is, they don't pay up to 30%, but they still want that 2% discount. And this is businesses operating with 5% margin. So this is one particular point which I would like to say. Plus, I would also like to add to what I was just saying. I think firms should start paying part in cash and partly in ESOPs, especially to their upper part. So this way they can save on their costs. Another thing is they must try to reduce their capacities. If you are on rent, go into a smaller factory. I think these are next 6 months you should try. Thirdly, pledging. There is a concept, if you own shares, if you own mutual funds, you could pledge them. Rather than taking a loan, pledging is a better scenario because you not at least need to pay interest on it. I think firms should also in next 6 months, which are already profitable for last 3 years, they may try to gear up so that they can raise some money on the SME exchange. And lastly, I would say, if you are having unusable assets means you have a machinery, but you're not using it for last 3 months or 6 months. There may be somebody else who can use it. Monetize on all your non-usable assets, which includes land, which includes factory building, which also includes machinery. Even people, if they are not contributing, if they are for 15 years, 20 years, I think either somebody else should take them who can be of use to them, or you need to really relook at what you want to do because this is survival mode, and Indian economy has got a major and it may just grow with 0.2% now. So I think we need to be
right. Ashwini, the next question, if you can take this, is from Subha Lakshmi, who says, what are some of the benefits that government is giving to SMEs at the moment?
That's actually very interesting. There is, I saw a lot of buzz about a package that's on the cards, for guaranteeing SME loans and injecting more liquidity to SMEs, all of that. But that's really an interesting question because what comes to my mind off the top of my head right now is a mudra, B, the existing credit guarantee scheme, and then some of the indirect benefits that seem to come in, via the RBI operations. But that's really, in my view, indirect because if you're helping banks, then banks are better positioned to lend technically, or if the banks can buy up corporate bonds, then they they pay their suppliers, and so on. But I think we're yet. I think we should at some point of time see some significant packages coming up, which I don't think we have yet seen so far. So I'm hoping there will be something more attractive and tangible coming up soon. I mean, I've seen buzz about it, on CNBC and Bloomberg Quint and so on, but I don't think that big package has yet hit the ground.
Right. The next question is, okay, so this is a slightly tricky question that Ms. Ananya, I would want you to answer. Krishnamurti V says, I am making EMI payment at this juncture without taking a break. That means she's not taken the moratorium. Will this help me get future credit easily?
So, this is a period where moratorium is offered, right? So the creditors who are paying EMI, creditors who are not paying EMI, are all to be seen at the equal platform at this point in time. But obviously, as you travel forward, if the EMIs are paid on a regular basis, obviously your credit history will be stronger, ability to get loans will be stronger. But I think this 3-month period has to be seen very carefully, right? This 3-month period is a moratorium period. So it's an option of the borrower to opt for moratorium, not opt for moratorium. And it's a clear guideline which says that even if somebody opts for a moratorium, their credit history should not get impacted in these 3 months. So given that scenario, I think these 3 months are a period where both will be seen on the same level. But obviously going forward, paying an EMI obviously improves the credit history, access to credit gets improved. So, and it all gets related to the risk scores that we share it with the lenders and also with individuals. We have Equifax risk scores that we have for individuals. So those scores will get calculated based on how the payment history has been post the moratorium period.
Right. Before we go to the next question, I will just quickly add that SIDBI had come up with 2 new schemes. One is called the Smile and the other one is Safe. So you might want to check that out. Smile is around equipment financing, and has a lot of attractive schemes, pointers there. It has interest rate starting at around 8.36 and a minimum loan size of 10 lakh for equipment financing and 25 for other purposes. So this might be something which is relevant for our viewers. I would urge you to check that out. And moving on to the next question, what is the safest form of fundraising? This is by Lubina, who says, what is the safest form of fundraising at the moment? Where will interest rates go, and what stimulus can the government create for SMEs? Saurabh, what do you think is the safest form of fundraising? And then probably I can ask each of you, okay, why one? If you can pick up 3 safest forms of fundraising at the moment. 1, 2, 3.
Okay. So actually there is an entire continuum which has been designed by an Harvard professor, and he says the safest form of funding is the retained earnings. So practically, if you have any retained earnings, that should be invested. That's the safest form. Now from there, if you don't have any retained earnings, then the second form of funding which should be adopted is debt. Now in debt also there are different types of debt. There is unsecured debt, in which you don't give a collateral, and then there is a secured debt. So in this we need to give a collateral for it. I think unsecured debt would be another option. In that, I think now banks, because they are not giving unsecured debt, so what is government doing is it is coming up with a scheme. I think in this week it should come up, whereby government will give the credit guarantee. So I think that would be the second option. The third is, of course, a secured loan where you could mortgage your house, your factory, and then go for this. And the last is again external equity. That means going in and accessing it through preferential investors or qualified institutional buyers. So external equity. Why external equity at the extreme right? Because you may lose control of your firm if too much equity buyers come in. And reserves and surpluses are the safest form because the ownership remains with you and still you are pumping in more money. So this is some continuum which has been designed by McDowell, and it's commonly taught in corporate finance courses.
Right. Ashwini, what will be your top 3 sources of finance if you are an SME and today you have to go bank, this, that, what?
So speaking, I mean, this is I'm answering as from a personal perspective, and I have a view that is almost diametrically opposite to what I think Saurabh alluded to. So I think the safest form of financing is cutting costs. Right? I mean, I cannot emphasize this enough because the rest of the types of financing are going to be incredibly hard to come by. So I mean, if you try going to a bank now to get funding, it's not going to be easy. It's going to take a lot of time, right? And so first is cutting costs. I mean, I cannot overemphasize this as an SME owner myself. Second, the second form of the safest form of financing is is indirect financing from your own suppliers and buyers, right? By deferring obligations, by renegotiating, right? Because this is what essentially is available to every SME owner, right? The rest might not be available. I mean, even if you want to raise a loan, you might not get one in this kind of an environment. So from a practicality standpoint, yeah, I would think like this, because let's say, for example, you have X amount of payables, right? If you get a part of it written off, that is financing. If you get a deferral, it's equivalent to getting a loan, which you pay back after a point of time. If you can convert some of that into equity at a reasonable valuation, that is again equity financing, right? Whereas, and over here, there is some kind of pressure on the other side to actually make that deal happen. If you go out to an external investor sitting on cash, there is no pressure. There is no need for them to come and make that deal happen. So you have no bad negotiating power there. The third, I would say, is an equity raise. Debt. Look, this business environment. I mean, I don't want to make it all doom and gloom, but this is not a good environment at all, and it is not going to magically pick up in 6 months. This is a good 2 years of hard times that one needs to brace for. So debt, I think raising is hard, but apart from the raising part, you got to repay also, right? And this moratorium, once it ends, see, liquidity may be a plenty. Interest rates on paper might go down because of all the benchmark rates and all. Your credit spreads are through the roof, right? So it's expensive, and you miss a payment, you'll lose your company. That's an extreme, but that's pretty much what it is. So I think so equity. If you can get equity infusion, that is, that is a safer one. So that would be debt would be my last preference.
Right, Mr. Nari?
I think both Saurabh and Ashwin possibly covered all sources of potential, funding. But I would look at it, broadly. I think whatever they've covered, two parts, right? One is, look at your cost control. I think we've talked in great detail, so that could fund some of the requirements. Another one is, I think you talked about supply chain, right? And how much supply chain credits can you get? And can you revolve faster than the credits that you get? And that can add to some positive cash. That's one part of it. The second part of it is evaluate between, all the conversations that we've had between debt versus equity, right? Which is the best way to finance the business, given the scenarios. I think each entity will have a very, very different scenario, very, very business requirements, very differently impacted by the current COVID impact, right? Or the lockdown, because some of the businesses are not impacted, some of the businesses are severely impacted. So they need to look at as to, given that scenario, given the future, outlook of the business, which is the best way to, finance at this point in time. But I would still talk about the last bucket, right? That is looking at your business. What can you do differently? How can we so we could do everything to cut costs and get credit and all of that stuff, but I think the positive spend for every business is to look at your business and see as to how can I adapt my business to the changing requirements in the changing world? What can we do to capitalize on the newer opportunities that are coming up? How can we reorient my business? I think that is, this is a time, I think, lockdown, hopefully, but till 4th, some time is available for everyone to look through their business models, get into details of what they can do, how they can utilize all their assets, in their organization to leverage going forward to, create a business model which can be successful, great thing to have, but at least overcome the challenges that everybody is facing. I think that is also a very important element of it as to how do I look at my business? What do I do differently? How do I adapt to the newer requirements? How do I adapt to the newer requirements of social distancing? The sensitivities that are happening in the marketplace? What do I do to adapt? I think those are the important elements, the way I see the whole scenario has to be seen going forward.
Right. Sadly, we are completely out of time. I think this is one topic that I think we can go on and on and on. And we have a lot of questions which still remain unanswered. So what I would do is I have all the email IDs of people who have sent me their questions now and earlier. So I would personally try and respond to each of them through a mail. And so yeah, I think that's the best I would be able to do at the moment. And in a nutshell, I think what we can take from this webinar is that sources of financing are available. There are some bright spots out there, and the role of banking sector is still vital, and it cannot be overstated. But cutting cost, looking closer at your business, uh, the way you function, that's going to be key. Brace yourself for tough 6 months, and we hope things get better. Thank you, Ashwini, Mr. Nania, Mr. Agarwal, for being a part of this webinar. And as always, we hope viewers we've been able to provide some answers. And thank you for watching. Next week, we are talking about business continuity plan, and we'll have an expert panel to take care of that. So I will see you next Friday. Goodbye, and thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.